we're excited to have Ryan Esaki presenting. Ryan is a Kauai native. He's a digital designer and a serial entrepreneur. He's been involved in digital media since its early days, from building Hawaii's first online video platform in 2006 to co-founding the popular Ukulele Underground Learning Network. Now, Ryan also publishes a very popular NFT podcast and is preparing to launch his own NFT project very soon. So in this session, Ryan's going to tackle the criticisms of NFTs head on and push past the hype to reveal the better, brighter digital future. Before we dive into the session today, I wanted to let you know that the session is recorded, as you were informed. So it'll be sent to those that registered as well as posted to YouTube. And more importantly, you're invited to submit your questions during the session through the Q&A function in Zoom. Look at the bottom of your screen for Q&A instead of chat. We'll address them when appropriate during the Q&A portion of this webinar at the end of Ryan's presentation. I do want to make a quick side interjection, a brief pause for this commercial announcement that Honolulu Magazine is also doing an NFT project, and they reached out to us to help us spread the word. It is, in fact, a fundraiser for a good cause and features artwork by a well-known local artist. So please check out hnlnft.com for information on that. And maybe we can talk a little bit about that during the session as well. So without further ado, welcome, Ryan. Please take it away.
Thank you, Ryan. Thanks so much for everybody for tuning in. Good morning, everybody. I'm super excited to be able to talk about NFTs in general. This is my life currently. I sold my last business last year, and my plan was to do the dad thing full time and become, just like a stay-at-home dad. But my life kind of got flipped upside down like the Fresh Prince, and I'm head deep into NFT land right now and building my own project. So I'm super excited to talk about the what NFTs actually are, because I think there's a lot of confusion in the space. And so just kind of wanted to help educate the people so they can have a, just a more informed opinion, and they can use the information in this presentation to form their opinion on NFTs. Sorry, Ryan, I don't use Google Slides very often, so I think this is what I need to do.
Yep,
so I forgot to change the title of my presentation to the killer app, but this is my original title of why you'll all eventually own NFTs. You just don't know it yet, because I really do believe that this is going to be a foundational piece of the future internet. So yeah, I can get started. So a bit of background on who I am. My name is Ryan Esaki. My past is things I've done in the past. I co-founded a company called Ukulele Underground. Our famous stories, we started with $300 because we were broke out of college, and we ended up running a profitable company for about 12, I don't even know how long it was, 12 years. And then we sold it last year in 2021 to Kanile Ukulele. In that time span, I also was a part-time YouTuber. I started a YouTube channel right before COVID called The Way of Ramen, and it kind of grew to 300,000 subscribers as well. Currently, I am the founder of an NFT project called Shinsengoku on the Solana network. It's an NFT-based idle staking strategy game. So it's not really one of those like profile picture collections. It's more like a GameFi play to earn kind of thing that I'm going to be talking about a little bit in the presentation. And this is my monkey. This is my Web3 me that you'll see most often usually. This smoking, I don't smoke cigarettes, but that just ends up the one that I minted. So that's my guy. Okay, so what we'll be covering today in this presentation, we're going to start off with the current perceptions of NFTs, because I think it's pretty popular to call NFTs the dumbest invention of the mankind in the history of mankind. So we'll be talking about those, what I agree with, what I don't agree with. And then we'll kind of get into what NFTs actually are, first technically at a high level, and then kind of in terms of the impact to commerce and society, what the current state of NFTs are, what the current landscape looks like, what people are doing, some potential uses and utility for NFT technology in the future, play to earn gaming, GameFi, replacing authentication and escrow. And then finally, just like briefly on the future of NFTs in society. So I just added this slide in right before we did this presentation, because I think it's important to give people context of the term NFT and what it means. So if people aren't familiar with the terms fungible and non-fungible, these are just some examples of what fungible things are. So NFT actually stands for non-fungible token. And so the difference between something that's fungible and something that's non-fungible, fungible things are things like dollars. If I give you $1 and you give me $1 back, we don't care if you took my dollar and I got your dollar, it's the same thing. Same with gold and Bitcoin and a lot of the cryptocurrencies that we trade on centralized exchanges and DEXs, decentralized exchanges, are all fungible. We don't care which one we get. Grains, rice, some things like this are all fungible commodities as well. And so non-fungible things are things like your house. You know, you can get something that looks exactly the same, but it's not your house. Contracts are also considered non-fungible. Your kids, your dog, things that you can get a dog that looks exactly the same, but it's not your dog. These are non-fungible things. So you can kind of keep that in mind when we're framing the idea of non-fungible tokens. So here's some of the current popular takes on NFTs. They're scams, they're bad for the environment, they're just JPEGs, which you can right click and save, and it's a giant speculative bubble. And so some of these things I agree with, and some of these things are just fundamentally wrong. And hopefully I can educate people today on why some of these things are fundamentally wrong in this presentation. So here are the takes that I do agree with. So there are a lot of scams, and we call it rugs or rug pulls in the space. And this is like par for the course with any kind of new emerging technology. Scammers come with opportunity because there's opportunity for scammers as well. And so scams and things like this and rug pulls and things like this where people steal money are not unique to NFTs. This is kind of like par for the course still with cryptocurrency in general. And also just with any kind of new technology. In 20 years ago, there's a game called RuneScape that a lot of people in NFTs played. And the scams that people are running in NFT land are the same scams that people ran in RuneScape 20 years ago. So it's not new. It's just like anytime there's a financial opportunity through scamming, scammers will come out. And also the NFT scene as a whole is a speculative bubble. And I also agree with this statement. It probably will pop eventually, and it may have already popped, which you'll see in the next slide. But when you frame that in context with other things that were speculative bubbles, such as the internet in the late 90s, that is a more accurate way to perceive it. The NFT technology, the technology behind NFTs is solid, and it's going to be transformational to the internet itself. But a lot of the applications of NFTs currently are very speculative, mania-driven, hype-driven kind of projects. That being said, probably the Amazon and eBay of NFTs already have been created and probably exist today. We just don't know which ones they are. And so when you kind of look at the bubble, this is a headline from a couple of days ago. Jack Dorsey sold his first tweet for 2.9 million last year, and the person who bought it just tried to sell it for 48 million, and the top bid was $280. So you could probably argue that in some respects the NFT bubble has popped, but then again, you have other projects that are coming out that are reaching, ridiculous valuations as well. So it's kind of, we're in that space right now. So the takes that I don't agree with are basically everything else on that list, the right click and save, bad for environment, and everything like that. So we can kind of get into that right now. I have an asterisk next to this one, bad. So this is the first most popular criticism about NFTs, that they're terrible for the environment. And I have an asterisk here because it is somewhat true, but actually not true at all. So hopefully I can explain it. So you kind of need to understand why NFTs can be bad for the environment and are not bad for the environment. You need to understand some basic blockchain fundamental information. So I'm not going to dive deep into the nerdy stuff. I'm going to give you like a brief 10,000 foot view of it. Blockchains basically what they are, like they're decentralized ledgers that you're building basically like a database through these blocks. And as these blocks are added in a string, which is called the blockchain, the transactions earlier in the blockchain become immutable, or they can't be changed. And how these blocks are added to the blockchain are done with consensus mechanisms. And the two most popular consensus mechanisms are proof of work and proof of stake. There are other things called DAGs, I forget this, decentralized acyclical graphs or something. I can't remember the acronym, but it's not important. Proof of work and proof of stake are the ones that we're going to talk about. So proof of work is what people think about when they hear Bitcoin mining. When you hear the word mining, you're talking about proof of work consensus. And what that is, it's using raw computational power to confirm blocks to a blockchain. And so it's a very secure consensus model. I have an asterisk there as well because that's also debatable. But just I'm not going to argue the nuances and fine points about these things. This is a general overview, but it also requires a lot of energy, which is why it gets the reputation of being bad for the environment, because you need to power these basically specialized computers to solve these equations to add blocks to the blockchain, and that requires a lot of energy consumption. The other model that's a newer consensus model that is quickly becoming more popular is called proof of stake, which instead of using miners or these ASIC miners you use validators, which basically are people that put up a bunch of the coin for a chance to be the one to choose the next block to put onto the blockchain. And so the way to kind of imagine this visually is proof of stake is more like a giant Wheel of Fortune wheel. And the amount of coins that you put up for to be the validator is like determines the size of your piece of pie on that Wheel of Fortune wheel that spins every time that there's a block confirmation, a block time that needs to be filled. And so that version of consensus actually pretty much requires no additional energy than the current version of the internet itself. And so if you were to say that proof of stake NFTs are bad for the environment, you're saying that the internet itself is bad for the environment, because that's basically what it is. The caveat for this, that why there's the asterisk there, is that Ethereum is currently the most popular network with NFTs on them, but it's also the only proof of work network with NFTs. Most other networks that have NFTs, Solana, Tezos, Avalanche, Near Protocol, Cardano, Phantom, are all running proof of stake already. So all these other blockchains that have NFTs are not running proof of work, and they're not mining. And Ethereum itself will switch to proof of stake within the next few months. So even that point will be moot by the end of the year. So that's why when you say NFTs are bad for the environment, it's probably from someone who doesn't understand these basic fundamentals about blockchain. The second most common thing is people will call them, they're just JPEGs. And this is actually kind of interesting because NFTs are actually not JPEGs at all. An NFT is a special kind of token which lives on a blockchain, which functions as a unique pointer to a digital asset stored somewhere on the internet. So the NFT, when it's minted, which is like when you create the NFT through another contract, smart contract, or another program on a blockchain called a smart contract, these two things, the minting contract and the NFT, work in tandem to produce a digital proof of authenticity for a digital object. And so the NFT itself can point to anything. It can point to an image, what JPEGs a lot of people are using them for, but it can also point to music, videos, text files, and even applications that are running on the internet. It doesn't matter what the NFT is pointing to. It's all it is doing is facilitating that through this two-node verification process, that whatever it's pointing to is the real authentic one. And being able to prove a digital asset as authentic and prove the ownership of it is transformational for the internet itself. And I think people, hopefully by the end of this presentation, realize like how transformational this idea can be. Oops. So yeah, right click and save is another common, like, you want to fade NFTs, how the cool kids say it these days. You want to fade something. Right click and save is like, oh, so funny. I stole this NFT because I right clicked and saved it. So often, like the point that they're missing is oftentimes what the NFT is pointing to is less important than the fact that the NFT itself can be used to verify ownership. And this is a great example of this is the Bored Ape Yacht Club, which is the most famous and valuable NFT collection in the world. Some other people came along and created this ape token, and they entitled Bored Ape Yacht Club holders to claim a token airdrop that was worth over $100,000 at the time that they were claiming it. Nobody who right-clicked and saved the Bored Ape could claim that ape token, which is why the right-click and save idea is just ridiculous in general, because it's not about the image, it's about the token, the non-fungible token itself. Okay, so why NFTs are transformational to the internet? So this kind of goes hand in hand with the evolution of cryptocurrency into what we're calling Web3 collectively. So blockchain allowed us, the blockchain technology, this decentralized ledger idea, allowed us for the first time in human history to transact fungible goods or fungible things without the need of an impartial third-party escrow. And so if you think about how we've transacted through the entire course of human history, we've always relied on a third-party agent to facilitate a transaction between peers that don't know each other, right? Because there's all kind of issues. And in fact, a lot of the litigation and legal system is based upon the need to litigate transactions that didn't go the way that they were supposed to go. And so contracts and all these things were invented, and lawyers were invented to argue about what happened during this transaction. That is all kind of made irrelevant with blockchain itself for fungible goods. And what NFTs did, it allowed for the first time in human history to verify unique digital assets and transact these assets in a programmatic way without the need for a third party. So this means, like, you don't need, if you want to sell a house now, you don't need an escrow agent, you don't need a realtor, you don't need all these steps theoretically. I'm saying this theoretically because it's not there yet. to do this, because you could do it with a program instead, which automatically takes an input and then spits out an output, and then it's done. You don't need to argue about things. Both parties come into an agreement. The contract is executed with programmatically on a blockchain level, and then it's settled automatically. So you don't need to worry about all that kind of settlement and escrow and holding money just in case somebody lied. All that kind of stuff is irrelevant at that point. Another transformational point about NFTs it presents an opportunity for creators and entrepreneurs to realign the financial incentives between themselves as creators and their consumers. And so the example that I always give for people that are trying to understand this idea of the realignment of incentives that I always talk about is that if you were an early user of Twitter, what did you get financially from that? You got join date Twitter 2006 or 2007, whatever it was. You didn't see any financial upside from Twitter. They didn't allow you to buy stock, private stock. They didn't allow you to share in the IPO profits. Those spoils all went to VCs and investors and angel investors and entrepreneurs themselves. But NFTs actually allow like common people who believe in a project idea and believe in a founder to kind of get in and share in the financial upside because of the way that these assets are decentralized and can be traded outside of ecosystems independently. You don't really have to. You can actually form companies essentially by crowdfunding, and having not just that, like the people that helped crowdfund will share in the financial upside just as a byproduct of good execution, without you having to issue securities and do all these things. And of course, like there's a lot of gray area, so we'll cover that. So the current state of NFTs, currently what I'm seeing in the landscape is the smartest people in Web 2 are literally dropping everything to dive into Web 3 and NFTs. Like there are countless CEOs of very successful Web 2 companies that have resigned from their positions, that have sold their businesses because they want to participate in this Web 3 ecosystem. It is to me personally, it's the most exciting phase of the internet since the 90s and the early internet, when the possibilities were endless and you have this idealistic thought process of what the internet could become and how the impact it could have for people that are suffering and struggling in the world today. That being said, most of the ideas with NFTs and Web3 are skeuomorphic. Skeuomorphism is an idea that's stolen from the design world, where you use understood conventions to represent new ideas. So examples of skeuomorphism in design is if you see an application with a dial, you know in the real world how to turn a dial, so you will design a dial that people can turn digitally with a mouse. And that's skeuomorphism in design. But when you talk about skeuomorphism in technology, you're talking about adopting ideas from a previous generation of technology into this new technology. So like early television ads where radio reads, the guy would just sit in front of the television and the camera and read the ad off the piece of paper. That's a skeuomorphic transposition of a previous outdated technology into new technology. And then eventually people figured out television ads. The early websites on the internet were brochures. People took a brochure and put that on the internet. And then people eventually figured out social graph and social media and rich media and all these things, video on the internet and things. So the current ideas for NFTs right now are like collectibles, like an idea that exists in the real world, which is not really interesting. Ticketing, these kind of things that are like low-hanging fruit, and they're not bad ideas. It's just that I don't think that they're the killer app yet. And also the legalities and the regulations around NFTs still need to be figured out, because a lot of them border on this unregistered security line, depending on what they choose to do with them. If they're promising financial returns for their quote unquote investors, you can get into a lot of trouble. So the regulation still needs to be figured out. The legalities of NFTs still need to be figured out. It's the Wild West out there. Like it's literally nobody really knows what's possible and not possible, both on the tech side and on the legal side. So everybody's trying everything, which is why it's so exciting. And finally, the true killer app for NFTs will be something that can only be done with blockchain and NFTs, and not something that's skeuomorphic in design. And I believe that is inevitable and will come, which is why I think everybody's going to be owning NFTs in the future. So yeah, like this is when I talk about potential future use cases, this is something that I am really excited about. I'm personally really invested in it as a creator now, which is this GameFi play to earn gaming kind of idea, which is basically taking digital assets from games and then bringing them into a decentralized system. So current games, which we have like Fortnite, Minecraft, Roblox, Valorant, League of Legends, basically all these kind of games that people play now, have in-game assets for them. They have characters, they have skins, they have gold items. Even games like Candy Crush, like, you know, mobile games have these things, items, some kind of currency in them. And these things already kind of are understood to have value within those ecosystems. What P2E games and GameFi does is it gives players true ownership of those assets and allows them to take them out of that game ecosystem and trade them or sell them freely in a secondary market. And so this idea is not new. Like it's been done with traditional games in the past with MMORPGs. It's been common for people to sell gold in World of Warcraft, for example. And World of Warcraft came out in 2005. But you can kind of like see some of the real world applications of this with existing games and also newer blockchain games. So in 2000, I don't know exactly what year it was, 15, 16, the US hit Venezuela with a ton of sanctions. And that caused like their currency to just inflate like crazy and the value of it to just plummet. So a lot of the smartest people in Venezuela fled the country actually. And the people that didn't flee the country, actually a large portion of them turned to farming gold in RuneScape, which is this 20-year-old MMORPG. They would farm this gold in RuneScape, which is not a blockchain game. It's just a centralized, regular old MMO. And they would sell it on the black market to people to fund their daily expenses. And similarly, during the COVID pandemic in the Philippines, when there were this massive lockdowns and people couldn't work, a lot of people in the Philippines turned to Axie Infinity, which is a P2E blockchain game on the Ronin network, which is a layer 2 of Ethereum, to replace their income. And that led to a bunch of things like scholarships, which is kind of sounds bad, like it's almost like indentured servitude. But it's a very privileged lens that we often look at these things in America or like the first world. Because if you actually listen to what people have to say about, I don't know if you guys can see this kind of what we're doing. I'm going to close that. If you listen to what people are saying in the Philippines, this is two people that were playing Axie Infinity. There's a documentary on YouTube that I screenshotted. They're saying in the Philippines like that they pray every night that Axie Infinity will never go away. And so you think about the global implications about, you know, providing alternative sources of income for people that can't work for whatever reason, whether being made redundant through automation or inflation or just the job markets or global pandemic again. I think it can be like a pretty big part of the economy. So the caveat to P2E and GameFi is that nobody has actually figured out a sustainable in-game economy which can provide that mythical stable income. Like these are highly volatile assets that you actually are trading. And like a lot of the games so far have been kind of built around these Ponzi-nomic models, which just inflate devalue and inflate the currency to like no end. And eventually people get tired and jump to the next one. But I really do believe that someone eventually will figure out a P2E gaming system that will work. And it will probably become like at least a larger part of the world economy and a legitimate career alternative or income alternative for a lot of people throughout the world. Some other potential uses for NFTs, things like authentication. So currently in Web2, we use a password and username password system. With NFTs, you can actually gate access to communities, whether it's like things like Discord or websites using NFTs. And so like you can just check if a wallet owns an NFT, and if they own it, you can give access. And if they don't own it, they can't gain access. And it's actually, if the user knows how to secure their wallets properly, it's a lot more secure method of authentication that can't be hacked than a username and password. NFTs can also be used to replace anything that we currently use contracts for. So securities and derivatives, like if you think about the options market on the stock market, every single derivative is a contract, essentially. It's an options contract. And those things can be tokenized and replaced with NFTs. You can use NFTs to trade large money items like houses and cars programmatically through a marketplace where you don't have to deal with, escrow agents and stuff. Again, theoretical, because there are risks if people aren't protected in certain ways, right? Like you could get scammed. Like we're in the Wild West right now. I wouldn't recommend anybody selling a house with an NFT today, but in the future, it could be possible for that to happen. Ticketing, concerts, plane tickets, it just makes sense. Like each ticket is a non-fungible item, and it provides like a way, like say if you buy a ticket for a concert and suddenly you can't make it, you could easily just sell that ticket on a secondary market. And recently I got a ticket for a conference as an NFT form, and I couldn't go to the conferences in Minneapolis. I couldn't go, so I sold the ticket to somebody else that wanted to go. And so it makes sense for both the people that are buying the tickets. It gives them options with it, and it just makes it really easy to kind of deal with things that come up in day-to-day life if you bought tickets and you need to figure out a way to get rid of them. And also an idea that I've been playing with a lot are the idea of jobs themselves as non-fungible tokens, because there are currently play to earn games that you have this token, this NFT that emits basically a salary in a digital currency. And I keep thinking about, you know, what's the difference between a job where you have a contract where your employer pays you, you know, every 2 weeks something amount of money that's set in a contract, or like an NFT that just emits salary as you work, you know, as you check in milestones, and it automatically unlocks things through smart contracts. And if you ever don't want that job anymore, you could sell that job. And that sounds like a horrible idea for employers, like, you know, employee retention. But I think this could be an applicable use for things like DAOs, like decentralized autonomous organizations, where you are by nature more decentralized. You have things that need to get done for your organization. It doesn't matter who does it. And so you could basically financialize a job market in this way as well. So these are just kind of like things off the top of my head that I can think of, like, see kind of happening in the future. Like I said, the true killer apps, probably we don't know what they're going to be yet, but, you know, the opportunities are going to be there. So in closing, I just wanted to point out some of the other things that were also weird and stupid on the internet at one point in time and other. Me and Ryan are from that first generation of internet users. So we remember all of these things were either really, really weird or just blatantly stupid. So entering your credit card online was ridiculous. Like, nobody would do that in the 90s. Like, you were an idiot if you entered your credit card online. It's just going to get stolen right away. Online dating was for just weirdos that couldn't get dates in real life. And now I think if you get a date in real life, you're the weirdo. Like, it's a weird thing to meet somebody not online. I think that's where we're at now. I wouldn't know. I've been married for a very long time. Phones with no buttons. When the iPhone first came out, the backlash for a phone with no buttons. How could you type emails without buttons? That was a big thing. That was stupid. Getting into a stranger's car and having them drive you somewhere. That is really weird 15 years ago. Not so weird anymore with Uber and Lyft and things like that. Staying in a stranger's home for vacation was also incredibly weird 10 years ago. When I booked my first Airbnb experience in 2011, my wife thought I was crazy because me and my business partners were flying to Oregon, and we thought it was a cool idea, and we stayed at this nice couple's house, and they made us breakfast. But my wife thought that was ridiculously crazy. It's not so crazy anymore. I think Airbnbs have kind of proven that they're not crazy. So it's kind of in closing, like, why I think NFTs are inevitable. Basically, things that reduce friction and save humans time and money will always win in the end. And NFTs actually do this. They can help facilitate this in tremendous ways. And that's why I believe that they'll become a foundational cog in the next version of the internet. So people just don't know it yet because of what we're using it for right now. It's not what we're going to be using it for in the future. Ellen asked me to put together some resources for how to learn more about NFTs. To be honest, most NFT quote unquote educational content is about degen flipping NFTs. Like, there's people that make a lot of money buying and selling NFTs. I've made a lot of money buying and selling NFTs, but it's incredibly risky. We also lose a lot of money doing this kind of stuff. And it can be pretty painful if you make the wrong choice. And there's a lot of scams. So I guess what I would recommend is you kind of learn by doing with an amount of money that you can lose. And I have NFA there, which stands for, in the crypto world, not financial advice. So don't do that. But that's kind of like a way that you can learn more about NFTs. But just in general, like, I would recommend everybody who's interested in this next version of the internet to learn more about crypto wallets, hot wallets like MetaMask and Phantom, learn about and how to interact with smart contracts. So the way that you interact with Web3 applications is completely different than what people normally do now. So, like, I was kind of talking about what we do with username and passwords and things. With Web3, you log into everything with your wallet. And so you can learn about that and learn how to do that by experimenting with low amounts of money. I think that would be worthwhile. Learn about the common scams and how people steal cryptocurrency in the space. And if you Google cryptocurrency scam, I'm sure you'll be able to find a ton of resources on that. And just learn about self-custodial best practices. The allure of cryptocurrency and why a lot of people were originally attracted to Bitcoin was the idea of self-governance and not having to rely on other people to store your money. That's a double-edged sword, right? Like, if you are responsible for your own money, you can also have all your money stolen and nobody's going to help you. That's kind of like the blessing and the curse, right? I recently got kind of like phone scammed, and luckily it was for my bank account, and my bank was able to, like, fix everything for me. That wouldn't happen in crypto, and luckily with crypto, I know that there's no customer support, so you kind of have to balance it with that. But yeah, learn about self-custodial best practices, and also just expect to get scammed and lose everything. So don't put a bunch of money in there expecting to get rich quick. It's definitely not advisable to do that. But it's great to be positioned as a native Web3 user when that future eventually comes. And I think it'd be worthwhile, and just in terms of education, for everybody to spend that few $100 to like learn how to do this, because I mean, you'll be ahead of the curve. You'll be like those first early Twitter users, first early Facebook users, first early whatever it was in the past. So that's basically it. That's all I got. If you have any questions, we can kind of take it from there, Ryan. I'm not sure if there's anything.
Fantastic. Thank you. You did cover quite a bit there, and I appreciate it. And as someone whose children think that NFTs are just horrible, with no particular reason, I believe their peer group believes that NFTs are just horrible. It's refreshing to hear from someone who's both clear-eyed about the downside of everything, but also still very excited about the possibilities. I'd like to invite people to post questions in the Q&A chat, but I know that they've been having a good conversation in the regular chat, so we can work there as well. Ryan, you talked a little bit about the false criticism about NFTs in particular being not environmentally unsound, at least not more so than, say, the rest of the internet. Sean Cover, who is also a well-regarded NFT leader here in Hawaii, commented, Ethereum uses the same amount of energy whether there are 1 million NFTs or 0. So can you explain that?
Yeah, exactly. So that's a great point. So what he's basically saying is that even if you think Ethereum itself is not good for the environment, whatever is being stored on Ethereum and at its smart contract protocol layer, it doesn't increase the energy consumption of Ethereum. So the best way to think about Ethereum and any smart contract enabled blockchain is like, people get it wrong. Like they think about it as money, but what these things actually are decentralized supercomputers that anybody can upload an application to, and anybody can run that application anywhere in the world off that blockchain. And so what Sean is saying is that no matter if you have one NFT on Ethereum or 1 billion NFTs on Ethereum, Ethereum itself still consumes the same amount of energy. And just in general, like I talked about earlier, Ethereum itself is going to move off proof of work to proof of stake, which will drastically lower its energy consumption as well. So that's a great point where adding more NFTs, and this goes for every blockchain, right? Like any blockchain that you add more NFTs to it, it doesn't make the network any more damaging to the environment,
right?
Just in general.
We have a question from John Holland, who wants to know your view of the Web 2/Web 3 interface. For example, a ticket, as you mentioned, for example, to get to an event has a lot of metadata that isn't on the blockchain itself. It could easily live in some database, MongoDB or Elasticsearch on OpenSea. Is a pure Web3 future likely in the next 5 years or so? You might need to help me understand the question.
That's a great question. So what he's referring to in metadata is the idea of storing additional. So I guess to answer John's question real quick, and then I'll answer your question, Ryan. Within NFTs, there are metadata. So you can store metadata within NFTs. What he's asking is basically like the way that we currently do ticketing and other things on Web 2 is you sell a ticket, and attached to that ticket and stored in a database are all these essentially attributes of that ticket. So seat number, section, row, all these things are what are considered metadata for that NFT, for that ticket. But we can do that with NFTs now. And actually essentially every single NFT is storing metadata in a JSON file. And that's how it works. So like when you see even the more popular profile picture NFTs, the Bored Apes, every one of their features, their eyes, their nose, their mouth, their hat, their clothes are technically metadata stored in a JSON file. And that's how you do that. That's how you assemble the collection. So that's actually a great question of like, and as far as interface, it's basically that. Like the NFT itself can store metadata. It's going to be stored off chain, like in a JSON file, but it's attached in the same way that a traditional Web 2 metadata would be attached to a Web 2 ticket. That's a great question. Yeah.
Excellent. So again, I encourage people to comment or ask a question in the Q&A function here in Zoom. In the meantime, we have one. Dig in again. Excellent. Says, I'm an educator who currently leads a middle school NFT club. Awesome. What, in your opinion, should I be teaching my students about NFTs or Web3 to best set them up for the future economy and workforce they will be entering? So I like how you said that getting in it now kind of makes you more of a Web3 native. Now we have students who are young enough but curious enough to literally be Web3 natives. What would you focus on?
That's a tricky question because I think the general idea of NFTs, the general popular opinion is you can flip them for a lot of money, and that is a great. I mean, like I've seen people like buy houses by flipping NFTs, right? Like there's tons of money to be made, like hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions of dollars if you get lucky. But in terms of like what I would be teaching kids, like I think about what I would teach my kid about NFTs. I think the best thing you can do is kind of keep them up to date about like what are the cool ideas that are coming out of NFTs to kind of get them into the creative mindset. I think what people the biggest opportunity is you can kind of create like the Web3 entrepreneurs of the future, where these people think of ideas of like, like what if we can create this system that fixes this fundamental problem with humanity? And so like the thing that I'm working on, like my full-time thing now after I sold my business is like, how do I fix these fundamental issues of like people not having enough money in the world and in Hawaii and things like that. And I think if you can frame NFTs in that sense and keep them up to date with some of the latest, coolest projects that are coming out, that would be great. The problem is to do that, it's almost like a full-time job to be involved and informed about what those things are. It's rather challenging.
Excellent. Well, definitely, I think focusing on things other than flipping NFTs like Cabbage Patch Kid cards.
Right, you remember that, yeah. Like flipping Beanie Babies and things like that. That's what people are essentially doing. Yeah.
You mentioned very briefly sort of running afoul of the SEC, right, and securities and promising value for an investment in a token. I can't tell you how many real estate people have come to me and said, hey, so I have this idea. We're going to do a token that's a percentage ownership of a piece of real property. And if the property increases in value, as it would, then the value of their token increases. But also being an owner is sort of like being a timeshare owner, and they can access the property and all of that. But what they don't know, as you mentioned, is that that kind of a linkage runs into the securities law. So can you
unregistered security law?
Yeah, can you briefly explore that?
Right. So there's a difference between security tokens and utility tokens. And this has been something that's been since the ICO boom of 2016, 17. And what people need, what we kind of like figured out through, I don't know if there's been case law on this from that era, but basically people always will get into trouble when they create security tokens rather than utility tokens. And so I guess I can explain the difference between the two. Utility tokens are something that has inherent value within a closed ecosystem. So like a decentralized project may issue a utility token to vote on governance, or in my case, as a game, to buy things in a game. And what the user of that utility token does outside of that ecosystem is none of my business. Like if I make a game, a P2E game, and I have a token in there, utility token that's actively has use cases in that ecosystem, what people do with it outside the ecosystem is none of my business. But if you tie a financial incentive to that token itself or to that NFT itself and saying like, hey, if you own this, you will see X financial upside. And I'm sure Ellen corrected me. I forgot the name of the test, the Huey test or something like that, where you can test if something is a security. A lot of the things that promise, like a big thing in the early NFT space was people promising a percentage of the royalties. So when you create an NFT, you bake in a royalty to it. So anytime that NFT is sold, the creator of the NFT gets a small cut of that transaction as a royalty. And so what some of the early projects were doing was promising their holders a percentage of the royalties. When someone were to sell their NFT, if you held it, you would get like 1% of that royalty sale or whatever, split between everybody who held it. That is obviously an unregistered security. It's like holding something with the expectation of return of monetary value. You can't do that. So the regulations need to be set for those kind of things. I think they'll be probably hashed out in case law. There's also some issues with the decentralized nature of it, where who is privy to certain parts of the contract. That's all going to get figure it out, I think, eventually. But yeah, it's kind of the Wild West right now. It's fun. That's why I like it. I'm
But
a
the Wild West
degenerate
can
at heart.
also be dangerous, sure.
Oh, it's
But
incredibly
it's
dangerous. I
exciting.
lost so much money just doing stupid things, but it's fun. Like, it's so fun. Like, I mean, not recommended, not financial advice. Don't do that. But
Got it. Ellen points out in the chat that it's the Howey test.
Howey test. See, I got it wrong
So
again.
you
Right.
can Google that. JC, who is a fellow Kauai resident, is a Web3 attorney in a Web3 attorney group, and they're focused on DAOs, which are decentralized autonomous organizations, securities, and IP issues. Noting that no legal precedent exists, so it's been really interesting studying this landscape. I like that. All right, back to the Q&A. I kind of like this deep one from Todd Robertson. Can you talk about the potential impacts of decentralization on equity and other forms of positive social change? So
I guess
big picture stuff.
I guess I need some clarification on what he means by equity, like equity ownerships of what, or equity in terms of.
I think more like digital equity or social equity, right? That can help uplift underserved communities.
I'm not really sure how to. I'm not really sure how I understand the question. Potential impact of decentralization of equity in terms of and other forms of positive social change. I can give you my take on what I think. I kind of briefly mentioned. I'll just tackle the positive social change part, and if you can inform me on the equity part.
Social equity, digital equity, financial equity. So not equity in the investing sense. Equity.
Oh, okay, not equity in the investing sense. Human sense. Okay, so yeah, like the biggest thing that gets me most excited about NFTs is the idea of realignment of incentives. And I talk about this all the time to anybody who listens to me talk about NFTs. But what NFTs actually allow you to do is have an alternative fundraising model to start something that's creative. And it's kind of based on this crowdfunding idea, but the people that crowdfund actually have financial upside that isn't directly tied to, it's tied to your performance, but not in a way that creates a security. And so an example of this is, traditionally with Web2 startups, you have an idea, you need money, you need capital. You go and find an angel investor or VC to invest in your money. You get a valuation, you give up a percentage of your company. Your early customers are just customers. They're not anything more than users and customers. With Web3, and then when you sell, the VCs take a big cut of that sale, and you get a big cut of that sale. Your users get nothing other than a new boss, a new service that they're interacting with, right? It's basically, right? Your contract with them is sold to a new owner. With Web3 and NFTs, the early believers in a project are essentially activist investors, and they can kind of get in at the ground floor. And based upon the production and the execution of the project team, they can share on a huge financial upside if they can find people that they believe in and want to work with. And they actually can have the power to move the needle as well by becoming more of an activist investor and saying like, hey, this is basically telling other people, like, I think that this is why that this is great. You should check it out. This is what I'm doing. And you've had these early evangelist users for Web2, but now there's kind of like that financial incentive to be that as well, which leads to bad behavior, to be honest. Like, they're shilling. That's kind of the term that people use. Like, people shill their stuff, and not really in hopes to pump it and sell it to people, like dump it on people. But really, it does allow for that that kind of equity growth. And also, like, in terms of P2E gaming, my dream is that, like, I'm so motivated to why I spend so much time and energy on trying to figure out this P2E thing is, like, I just think about all the people in Hawaii that are getting displaced by the rising cost of living in Hawaii. And imagine if, like, I can be part of that creation of that ecosystem that allows people to play games on their phone and earn $200 a month extra, help pay their electric bill, help pay their water bill and stuff. And that's like a real possibility that we might hit within a year. And I want to be part of the solution, because I think one of the most tragic things about the pandemic was the state as a whole never figured out an alternative to tourism. And tourism in itself is not like an evil industry, but it's dangerous to have an over-reliance on tourism for everybody's livelihood and to create like a sustainable economy. And so I'm very, very highly motivated in that field because of those reasons.
I love that. I mean, I also lament that I feel we squandered that opportunity. Our near-death experience did not make us change our behavior.
Yeah, we just kind of covered our face and hope that we came out on the other end. Like, it's kind of tragic, but
well, I think John Holland has a very good question, because I'm facing this myself. So how do we overcome the FUD, the fear, uncertainty, and doubt? surprised at how many super smart people completely trash talk NFTs with misinformation. So how do you persevere in your hope, Ryan, despite the fact that there are people like my kids just pooping on over on everything?
Honestly, I don't. Well, say here, there's two takes on this, right? Like, so personally, I don't care what anybody thinks because I think I'm right. And so like we'll see what happens in the end. Like I don't have any interest in convincing people that can't be convinced because I would just watch them use NFTs in 5 years to like buy concert tickets or buy their plane ticket or whatever. And that's what it'll be. On the second hand, like sometimes FUD can be good because you need to like there's a mania in the space right now where people are just buying and selling on hype. There was a project on Solana yesterday that launched called OK Bears. When I looked at their roadmap and what they plan to do, I wasn't impressed at all. But that thing, because of the hype around that project, just skyrocketed like crazy. It's worth around, I mean, Solana is smaller than Ethereum, so it's worth around like $3,000 for one right now. But you know, like I think certain amounts of FUD can be more helpful for and beneficial for the space as a whole. I want more sophisticated people in the space, and having legit criticisms of ideas and projects is not a bad thing if it's legitimate criticism. So I approach it both ways, right? Like personally, I don't care what people think, but I also think like, yeah, people who are doing bad things should get cut out as well. So
if it makes you think twice, that's a good thing.
Right. Like if it makes you think twice and then you can research to have a more informed opinion about things, then it's a good thing for everybody.
Jasmine has a fair question. And I think, we've talked outside this event about like Jasper Wong's, Fumamofos, and a lot of other local artists. So Jasmine wants to know that as local artists have started to use NFTs as a platform to share and sell their art, would you encourage other emerging local artists to get into this space as another medium of their work?
I think it's pretty powerful for any artist or creative to kind of explore at least the NFT model just because of the royalties attached to them, right? Like I was a musician for a long time. My first company was in the music industry. We taught people how to play ukulele, and we also toured and performed and sold CDs and did the kind of 90s, early 2000s era thing. When you sold the CD, you didn't get any royalties. Once it was just a transaction, like you give me money and I get the CD. And now, like with musicians and musicians, artists, and anything, if you create something that people want, that's the trick, right? Creating something that people want. But if people want it and are willing to buy it and sell it and resell it, like just the royalties alone makes a lot of sense for artists to kind of take a look at it, at least, because who wouldn't want to generate like a 5% to 10% return on an art that's just getting sold and over again without having to create additional art, right? Like it can create an alternative source of revenue for an artist just for that reason. So
right, if you sell a painting at outside the zoo, it sells once, and that's the
right.
money you're going to make off of it. And even if you're talking about a $5 piece of art, after 7 or 8 sales, you might get that full amount again.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
I like that. Okay, I think we have 3 more questions, and we'll wrap it up here. I will let Jasmine ask the next question because I was curious about it myself. Do you think this upcoming election, and I would say both state and eventually federal elections, are important to the future of blockchain technology, but specifically her question is in Hawaii?
Honestly, I haven't been following much about the state. I've been heads down and building this thing, man. Like, I don't know what's going on. You tell me, what do you think, Ryan? Like,
well, the legislature is, as I mentioned at the top, looking at a bill right now. It's in conference this afternoon, 1:30 p.m. I'm going to tune in to see how it does. It's keeping the door open to exchanges operating in Hawaii. I think that, electing forward-thinking politicians is an important thing to do, but it's hard for anybody, including politicians, to be an expert on every field. So I'm not disappointed if they don't understand crypto. Okay, Trung wants to...
I would like to just add to that. Like, so if that's the case, if what's happening, the most tragic thing that any state legislature could do would be block access to the next version of the internet, right? You're going to block the opportunities. You're going to block all the opportunities for locals to get into the next version of the internet because you're afraid that some of them might get scammed. Like that's horrible, in my opinion. So
well, and the other challenge of that is that it's like, can you really block the internet? Like, can China really block the internet? Not really, right? So okay, Trung, good friend and crypto enthusiast, wants to know, okay, so the NFT on the blockchain seems relatively secure, verifiable, but what secures the asset that the NFT points to?
Nothing. Like that's the thing, right? So like that's also like been one of the criticisms of NFTs, right? Like if the person who created the NFT stores that NFT, stores the NFT when I'm talking about the image or the media file on AWS, and then doesn't pay their AWS bill, that thing is gone forever, right? And it's just pointing to something that's whatever. And if the person who created the NFT doesn't care, the person who purchased that NFT from that person will just have a pointer to a null address, essentially. There are things that people are using for NFTs called IPFS, Interplanetary File Storage, which is a decentralized storage network, but there isn't an AWS for the Web3 yet, which someone should really build. So right now, people are using IPFS and Arweave, which are two of these more decentralized storage things, but even those things aren't perfect as well. So that's a great question. A lot of it is we're really in a transition. So like a lot of people that live in the future think we're there, and so you see a lot of people trying to build fully decentralized applications on the blockchain. But to me, when I see that, that's more like when people try to stream video with dial-up internet. Like the idea is good, but the technology isn't quite there yet, which is why we have this hybrid system of like pointing to something rather than it being stored on a blockchain. But eventually people will figure it out, I think. Yeah, but yeah, the answer to that is the answer to that is like nothing, like that's the truthful answer. Like it's up to the people that sell the NFT to take care of the people that buy it, in my opinion.
Well, I've been posting on the internet since 96, and I go back to my blog then, and it's like, check out this interesting link, but that doesn't go anywhere anymore.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, this is a fun question to close with, I think. What is Ryan Esaki working on these days?
So I kind of mentioned in the presentation that I sold my last business and was planning to do the dad thing for a couple of years, but I've actually been working on an NFT project myself. It's called Shinsengoku. It's an idol. So it's not like one of those profile pic collections. It's more of a GameFi project. It's the way that I describe it is PvP, player versus player, idle staking strategy game. So there's a whole sector of GameFi that's coming out that is kind of like gamifying this idea of staking. And I can kind of give a brief rundown of how the game itself works. It's a very simple game, but initially with the first version. So you have these NFTs that we're going to be selling next month in May, and you can stake that NFT in this game. And after you stake the NFT, it starts generating this token that we've created, and you have to use that token to buy troops to attack and defend against other players. And so it's kind of like a mix between Clash of Clans and like a decentralized Clash of Clans mixed with like some of the old games that I play, like Warcraft 3 and StarCraft and kind of like that. But it's a very simplified MVP called minimal viable product of this idea. And my goal of this is to kind of combat some of the worst parts of the Ponzonomic GameFi models that have kind of come up. And that's our Twitter. Ryan put it up on the thing. Yep. The Discord server is there as well. And like kind of figure out a way to kind of reward people that are reinvesting back into the ecosystem and let them do the earn side of the P2E and really try to like not punish, but mitigate the damage that the sell side of these people who play P2E games do. So for people that aren't familiar with P2E, there's basically two types of players. There's people that want to play the game and like the idea that if you play a game, you can get some kind of financial reward. Maybe you get like $100 a month, $200 a month, or whatever. And these people are actively playing the game the way that the game designer wants it to be played. Like they're reinvesting their earnings back into the game to get stronger, and etc. And then you have a second group of players basically just view these games as financial instruments and trying to figure out how to extract as much value from a game before it dies as possible. And these people are often extracting tokens from a game and selling it to players in player group 1. And so the way that I designed the game is basically like it's very hard to do that second route because of the stealing mechanism. Like if you aren't investing into your army, building your defenses, then your tokens are going to get stolen every day basically before you can claim them. And so you'll have less tokens to sell as opposed to someone who's actively playing the game, reinvesting back into the game. They'll be able to attack and get tokens and take those tokens out of the game and then do whatever they want with it on the secondary market and stuff. So it's a big experiment. There's no guarantee it works, but I think it's a good step in the direction that a lot of these games need to go, because I'm going to go on a diatribe here, Ryan, stop me if you need to stop me. But the big problem with a lot of the design for a lot of P2E games so far, like Axie Infinity and Wolf Game on Ethereum and all these other games, is they're incredibly inflationary. They're creating this token out of thin air, and they're trying to create what's called token sinks or burn mechanisms on the other side to take those tokens out of supply. But oftentimes that the player group 2 who are looking at these things as financial investments they don't care about the token sinks. They just want to sell it off as quickly as possible. So in my hypothesis and thesis is you need to basically stop that from even being a possibility at the game level first. And so it's a big experiment to see if this works. Fun to try to battle against these people that are going to be trying to ruin the game. But I think we have a lot of cool things planned and a lot of cool token syncs in mind that I think would even convince some of the most hardcore earners of play to earn to play the game a little bit more.
I like that you're trying to do it right, that you're trying to iterate the space. I hear so much about play to earn, but a lot of it does seem like made out of thin air and rife for exploitation. So I like the way that you're thinking. So thank you for sharing that personal project. Before we close, very quickly, I pressed the wrong button. Very quickly wanted to again mention the Honolulu Magazine NFT, currently undergoing now as a benefit for the YWCA of Oahu and Aloha United Way. And you can go to hnlnft.com. I was trying to place my bid during the webinar, but Ryan was just way too interesting to try to multitask like that. So we've come to the end of the session. I would very much like to thank Ryan for your time today. I hope everyone learned as much as I did. Thank you.
Oh, thank you guys for all attending.
And a quick reminder that this session has been recorded, so we'll share it with you soon. Keep an eye on your inboxes or look for DCIL Presents on YouTube, and for sure, share it with other people. I think it was very informative. So thank you, everybody, for joining us today, and we will see you at our very next webinar. And I guess I press stop here.